I think my load shedding is going to end. Everything's going to beep in the house just now.
Well, guys, welcome. Cool, guys. Well, welcome to this year's social media landscape report 2022. It's the Goliath versus David play. And I think that's really topic for this year at the end of the day. Guys, let me introduce the panel. Sorry, I'm just going through a little bit of load shedding, so you'll see me coming in and out. It's just great timing for our social media landscape report. But so, guys, I just want to thank a couple of our partners that have put some real effort into the social media landscape report and made it and gave it that real body that we have. Firstly, Ask Africa and TGI, thanks for that. Data, Ad Dynamo, Turn Left Media, and the IAB have been really cool partners in this. Before I go to our panelists, really to Jess and really who on my team have put hours and hours and hours of work into this. So guys, thanks for all the hard work. And to our panel, and we've got an amazing panel again this year. Calvin from who are obviously our partners and have been for the last couple of years. MJ Khan, who's been our panelist since about 2012, so on and off. So MJ, thank you very much. Nice to have you. Tumi Rabanye, who I've known and has been and we've been friends to Delaney, South Africa, and Bonkle from Joe Public. Guys, thank you very much for being our panelists, and we're going to get this spirited conversation kind of going through. And obviously the Ornico partner, Worldwide Worx, on this. Arthur, you've been a solid partner and with us since inception, and it's really cool to have you again in this. So without further ado, Arthur, do you want to take us through the highlights, findings of our presentation? We've got 15 minutes, and we're going to go into a question and answer. So to all the guys that are on this, just ask the questions. We will then relay it into our private chat, and I'll relay it to each of the panelists. So Arthur, over to you.
Thanks, Oresti. Welcome, everybody. Great to be chatting about our social media research again this year. But first, I must just share with you a very significant development. A cat metaverse mug. I think that will really sum up what happens in social media this year. But seriously, I'm going to share with you key findings from the corporate survey we conducted, and then the consumer insights into how social media is being used. And there's one phrase that keeps coming to mind for me, and that is that shift happens because we saw a big shift this year. The metaverse is one significant theme, but the shift in how brands are using social media is really dramatic. And without further ado, I'm going to share our presentation on the core findings. Firstly, starting with the social corporation. Just by the way, you can tag us on social media with hashtag SocialSA2022 and my Twitter handle R2G or at Ornico and at Worldwide Works. Thanks. The Social Corporation looked at South Africa's 100 biggest brands, or a representative sample of South Africa's biggest brands, but with 100 respondents. And to start with, we just have to show you what last year looked like, which brands were using which platforms. And there was a very clear pecking order, with Facebook at the top, Instagram next, then LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. The last two quite close to each other. The shape of 22 shows how big the shift is. And this is the new shape. Facebook suddenly isn't all powerful. Instagram falls back. LinkedIn leaps up. So amongst major brands, LinkedIn has become just as important as Facebook. Twitter holds its own. It's now level with Instagram. YouTube has fallen back significantly. And then leaping up from seemingly nowhere is TikTok. It looks small, but look at the trajectory. If you look at those numbers at the bottom, TikTok jumped from 12% to 25%, so more than doubled in usage by South Africa's biggest brands. And that trajectory clearly is a very powerful one that we can expect to see continuing. Because when we ask what platform you're going to use in the next 12 months that you're not currently using, only one sticks out significantly, and that is TikTok. And not that dramatically, 13% of brands say that they'll be adding TikTok to their arsenal in the coming year. But no other platform has more than 7% of brands saying they'll be adopting it in the next year. So you can see TikTok has real resonance among brands. And then the other big shift that we saw in the past year was the embrace of short video platforms, in particular Reels on Facebook and Instagram, and then TikTok stories, and the also ran Snapchat's Spotlight. TikTok, you can expect to see that trajectory matching the trajectory of general usage of the platform. But for now, Instagram rules on Reels. And so that's last year's. Why is your company using social media is a key question. And here we saw another of the big shifts. If you look at those numbers under 2022 and compare them to 2021, a big fall came in being core to the marketing campaign and in customer lead generation. And that was replaced by a significant rise in being an effective PR channel. So public relations specialists watching this, pay close attention because that comes up again. Who's managing the social media accounts? Again, a shift. Marketing stays steady, but agencies and individuals have dropped dramatically. Last year, both were at 27%, and this year, 16 and 17% respectively. But what is leaping up to replace them is the PR team from 3% to 12%. So you can see a significant awakening of the importance of social media in public relations in South Africa. And then the other really significant shift that we've seen has been how social media effectiveness is being measured across social media. This is the Facebook picture. And the dramatic shift we've seen here is the fall in the importance of likes and shares from 65% down to 50%. A number of fans stays steady, but generally speaking, the kind of engagement that has been important in the past has dropped in significance. Even inquiries via Facebook has dropped in significance for the brands. Click-through rates, which you would expect to be major, has also dropped significantly. I'll show you on Twitter how that filters through to other networks as well. Number of followers has dropped from 37 to 31%. The number of mentions and comments has dropped from 47 to 39%. Most significantly, retweets has dropped from 41 to 34%, and that in the past was almost the gold standard, how often you get retweeted. Now it's really the value of who retweets you rather than how many people retweet you. But then the contrast is LinkedIn. Look at likes and shares, jumped from 36% to 43%. Inquiries dropped, mentions and comments stayed the same. even number of posts have dropped, but look at number of followers, jumped from 10% to 26%. So following as well as likes and shares rising in significance in LinkedIn while dropping on the consumer-oriented platforms. And that starts showing you the importance of the value of who engages with you and who is sharing. So if it's generic sharing, it's not as valuable as high worth, and I'm not talking about high net worth individuals, but high worth individuals in terms of their importance or influence. You could say this is about influencers, but not really. It's really about the credibility of who shares posts and the like. And then that must be read hand in hand with the question, has social media brought brand returns? And there's, again, a significant drop from 76%, 3/4 saying yes, down to 65%, only 2/3. So why is social media not working? Well, partly it's because the previous approach and how it was measured wasn't working, and that's why we're seeing this significant shift. So that must also be read in conjunction with this question, whether social media has the potential as a tool to help our business grow. And there we saw one of the most dramatic shifts of all. The proportion who strongly agree with that statement has dropped dramatically from almost unanimous 91% to only half the respondents, 50%. So suddenly there's also an awakening that you're not going to grow your business with social media. Well, at least half the people don't agree with that statement anymore. Why isn't it working? Well, here's one of the key barriers to preventing marketers from getting more value. And this is the one that stood out. There were a number, you'll see in the full report, which will be available at no cost to download. You'll see that there are a number of other factors we measured, but this is the one that stood out. When you look under at the bottom, as a significant barrier, lack of budget jumped from 29% to 36%. And that stands out as the single highest percentage of attitudes to that question in the survey. So clearly, lack of budget is preventing social media from meeting the objectives of major brands. And this partly also answers that question. Have you allocated budget towards new technology for marketing purposes? And 2/3, 65%, said no, they haven't. And when you look at what they are budgeting, almost no technology area is getting significant budget. Chatbots have dropped from 47% to 14%, cloud from 41% to 13%, artificial intelligence from 32% to 11%. So brands are not getting how technology can help them achieve their social media objectives, and therefore they're not allocating budget towards that purpose. And as a result, that has become a barrier to achieving your objectives on social media. We now move over to the social consumer. And this is based on the survey conducted by Ask Africa through the TGI tool, Target Group Index, which annually, well, last year interviewed 24,000 respondents aged 15 or more, living in cities and large towns with a population of more than 8,000. And the data is weighted to the population as recorded by Stats SA and represents around 28 million South Africans. So what we looked at was some of the key demographics for each of these social platforms. And this was highly revealing. So on Twitter, for example, it skews heavily towards male users. 58% are male, and strong skew towards the 25 to 34 age group. This is distribution, not penetration. So 40% of Twitter users in South Africa are in the 25 to 34 age group. Very few aged over 65. And then when we look at the level of education and socioeconomic level, or rather lifestyle measures, skewing heavily towards the upper LSMs and towards the most educated. A massive 59% have tertiary education. And that explains the level of intellectual content on Twitter. Oh, wait, it actually proves that just because you have tertiary education doesn't mean that you are capable of intellectual content production, as we've seen on Twitter. Then Snapchat is the opposite in terms of the both the gender profile and the age profile. 64% female, skewing heavily towards women, and especially under 25 years old. 46%, half the sample are under 25. And that partly explains why Snapchat is also dwindling in use in South Africa. We don't have the actual numbers, but we think they've actually dropped below 1 million users in this country. When you've got such a small sample, it's very hard to measure based on something like TGI. But the fact is that Snapchat has been decimated by TikTok. Instagram flips the other way again, 58% male, and the majority, or at least the biggest age group, is the 25 to 34, the 38% of Instagram users in that grouping, and then dropping off significantly with each age group until there's no one in post-retirement age, or almost no one using Instagram actively. Now that matches quite closely to Facebook, which in terms of the age profile, but in terms of gender, it's almost equal, 51 to 49. Sampling error can mean that they're exactly the same. But interesting that the age profile is very similar to that of Instagram. What Facebook really represents to a large extent is the South African population of social media users in general. Around half the population uses social media. This is the education and LSM breakdown, which also, again, comes closer to reflecting the population of social media users as a whole, compared to Twitter, which is heavily skewed in terms of both education and LSMs. Facebook looks more like what the country looks like. And then TikTok is the one that everyone will be really interested in. And here you can see it skews female, but not dramatically, not as dramatically as some of the other platforms. 55% female, 44% male. And then age, still heavily towards youth, but not completely dominated by the under 25s. In fact, almost the same proportion or same number of people in the 25 to 34 age group as in 15 to 24. Again, this isn't penetration, but distribution. So around a third are in each of the two smaller age groups. And you can see the 65s are tentatively entering TikTok to watch their grandchildren's TikToks. And then LinkedIn is, again, one of those really fascinating ones where the gender balance is almost exactly equal, 50 to 49%. And again, a margin of error would mean that you could equate the two. But where you really see the numbers stand out is in age breakdown, with 60% of LinkedIn users in the 25 to 34 age group. So you can see it's being used very much as a career building tool. And it's also the reason it's taken so seriously. People see this as part of what they do and what they want to become, rather than just a random social environment. Level of education also emphasizes this, massively skewed towards those with tertiary education and hugely skewed towards the upper LSMs. These are educated, qualified people who are earning a decent income. And this partly explains why LinkedIn is so attractive to major brands, to the extent that it's caught up to Facebook in terms of usage by big brands. And this is LinkedIn's official data also giving an indication of why it's become so important. So gender breakdown, very similar. Users 9.9 million. And I'll put that in context in a moment. Again, their age breakdown shows that massive 25 to 34 bias. But now have a look at the growth of LinkedIn year on year. So 2018 was 6.8 million, 2019, 7.5, 2020, 8.4. It looked like it was a slowing trajectory, but then let's look at what the number looked like in the last month or so. from 8.4 million at the end of 2020 to 9.9 million middle of 2022. That trajectory has not slowed down, and this again emphasizes why LinkedIn has become so important to brands. And then the topic or the theme that we are addressing quite heavily, the metaverse. This was a fascinating stat we found in the TGI data. 16.1% of adults say they visited a virtual world in the past 12 months. And that is almost the exact same proportion as for Tinder, of all things. But Tinder is regarded as mainstream. The metaverse is not, yet it's the same proportion of users. The reason really is that virtual worlds are also equated with immersive in-game environments like in Fortnite or Minecraft, where you can go visiting other people's properties, you can build in that world, and you can explore it. So those are seen as part of the metaverse. And when you incorporate those, then you can certainly say the metaverse has gone mainstream. Let's look at the sentiment and conversation around the metaverse. This is on Twitter, looking at word clouds. And when you look at the word metaverse and which words are associated with it, you see it's heavily focused on crypto, NFTs, and the like, but none of them standing out significantly. When you look at phrases that go with metaverse, one word jumps out at you, and that is friends. So the metaverse clearly is still perceived as, well, firstly, an environment for scamsters trying to sell you their latest NFT, but more significantly, a social environment. It's about meeting with friends. It's about socializing at this stage. The metaverse is not yet an environment in which you want to work. And I feel quite strongly about the fact that the idea that we'll be working in the metaverse soon is a marketing idea from one Mark Z, but not a reality in the very near future. But socially, yes, people are going to enjoy the metaverse. And then finally, let's look at overall sentiment. And this is, again, from Twitter. Twitter's sound clouds and emoji clouds are a fascinating indication of the vibe of social media in South Africa. And in the emoji cloud, the central emoji is one of joy. Right alongside that is laughter on the one side and tears on the other. But joy is the central emotion on the Twitterverse. And when we look at the word cloud, the word that leaps out at us is people. And this emphasizes the extent to which social, the metaverse, and the engagement in the social media environment from both brands and individuals is around people and not technology. Thank you very much.
Great, Arthur. Thank you very much. And I think, as Arthur mentioned earlier, is that this report will be available after this webinar at 11 o'clock to download off the Worldwide Worx website or the Ornico website. And there's some, when you read Arthur's article, it's absolutely fascinating, and there's some really nice insights on that. And I'm going to ask the panel around some of those insights that Arthur gave now into why. But before I go there, I think just some information about the survey that we did. And it's really interesting in that the people that completed, the respondents that completed the survey were from senior management and predominantly from senior management and director level. And they were also either the sole or the partial decision makers. So it really gives gravitas to that to that survey at the end of the day, which is, I think, is really, really cool. When Arthur was showing that measure of effectiveness and how likes had come down a little bit more from a measure, and what I did is I did a little table, and I plotted Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and I plotted the respondents where they were measuring across and where they found it, position 1, 2, and 3. And as Arthur said, likes and retweets hardly featured. comments featured either in position 1, 2, or 3, and click-through rates also out of all those platforms featured 1, 2, or 3. So they came up every single time as a measure, which I find interesting. Which will click-through rates. I mean, really, what is the job of marketing? Is really to kind of to increase sales. Basically, at the end of the day, yes, there's brand awareness and everything around that, but really to increase sales. So click-through rates, is it linking up to a product? Where are those click-through rates ultimately going to? So without further ado, last year's and this year's theme is about the Goliath versus David play. MJ, just talk to me about that shift from away from Facebook and Insta, etc. What is your thought from a brand perspective?
Thanks so much for the opportunity, and hi to everyone on the call. Pleasure to be here. So very interesting shifts. I think a lot of us, without seeing the data, would have just assumed TikTok would have exploded and eaten into everyone's time, because at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about, right? The commodity is time, the asset is time, and it's how we spend that time. We can look at the granularities of the platforms and then start understanding, are you on TikTok, are you on Facebook, are you on Instagram? What you're really measuring is where you're spending your time. So it speaks to a few things. I think number one, it speaks to social media not being that shiny anymore, social media not being as cool anymore as it used to be, right? Almost like email. So when email came out, it was something fantastic. It changed the way we communicate, but now it's ritual. Now we don't celebrate email. So in that way, Facebook in of itself hasn't become an event. It hasn't become something that's worth celebrating. It's just, well, it's there, and we find that use value however we do. For some of us, Facebook is still great for keeping in touch with families. For others, it's an amazing reminder tool so you can wish someone on their birthday. And I think in that sense, that's one aspect of it. The other aspect as well is as companies become Goliaths, I tend to assume that they tend to become better at monetizing. So that's something that Facebook does really well, Instagram does really well. And the problem is, the more you monetize, often the more you put off the consumers, right? So you get really good insights and really good data for your advertisers, but then users start realizing that they're becoming commodified even more, and they start moving away, they start shifting away. So I think that might also play a role in it. And then lastly, you have to admit as well, there's also the generational pressure as well. I think the more the older generation start gravitating and getting more comfortable with certain niches and platforms, the more the younger generations might then gravitate away from it simply because of visibility, etc. So there's a few factors at play, but it is an interesting thing, and I do think sometimes we look at it and we look at Facebook's declining numbers and we say, oh, here's the death of Facebook. But while we go and search for those insights, we're still not appreciating how big it is. They might lose a couple of million monthly active users, but it is still a juggernaut. And we tend to focus on the sort of decline or the drop, but not really appreciate the plateau. So I think there's a lot of factors to this.
Oh, thanks, MJ. Bongle, I mean, just to follow up on that, remember that the survey is a forward-looking survey. So it's where do you intend spending your money as a respondent? Where do you intend spending your money in the next 12 months? And that's where the drop is. Obviously, from your side, Bongle, being in an agency, you're feeling it from your client's perspective. What are your thoughts around that drop?
Actually, I thought it was very, very interesting because I would have thought, as MJ said, that TikTok would have been a little bit more higher up there. But I think it boils down to, and I think for us, especially being in the social media space, it's about user behavior and interaction, right? So I think that what a lot of brands are doing is that they're not conveying their message in a relatable way to their people. So when you look at TikTok, you look at everybody getting an in-feed ad, and the platform itself speaks to more content creation, more organic, realistic kind of content being pushed through. But then brands come with an ad that should be on TV, on TikTok, and doesn't link well with the audience. So I think a big part of it is that everybody's got this. I know when TikTok came around, everybody got this, oh my gosh, what do? We have to be relevant. We have to jump onto this. But it's about how, you're going to jump onto these things. So I do think that it's very, very interesting that there is this drop. But yet again, I think also another thing that we have to pay attention to and mind to is how content is being consumed now. I mean, when you think about it, years ago, it was who you knew, who you were following, and that's the kinds of content and things that you were exposed to. And now it's a whole different ballgame with algorithms. That's why I feel like even categorizing users based on LSM and their race is a little bit outdated. I think we need to look more at tags. What are people looking at? What are people watching? And how is that relevant to the brand? So for example, TikTok does it really well. If you spend your watch time on I don't know, maybe saying watching a dog or watching a cat or watching animals is longer than that on maybe a car or something else. Obviously, the algorithm would then pick up that this person's more interested in animals, and then it will direct that kind of content to you. So I think that the way in which people are consuming content right now is very different. And therefore, brands really need to strategize and see, okay, how do we stay relevant in this specific platform?
So the way consumers consume data and content, should I say, evolves. But from a brand's perspective, to me, they want to look at some sort of return on investment. And they want to see that when they do their campaigns on social media, that actually it becomes effective. What is your take on this shift in terms of the measurement of effectiveness on those different platforms?
Aristi, the first thing, Buntle, I'll just finish this point and hand over. It's actually the measurement for me is the first place I went to, because I find myself sitting in spaces a lot more with clients who want to understand and who want to be empowered with how the social media platforms are going to help them actually deliver on key objectives. And I think in the evolution that I'm observing, and actually justifies the trend around Facebook and LinkedIn its growth, I think that long form of content and the ability to actually curate and narrate your story in a way, I guess, that you can reveal in chapters. I think that's what the platform allows for. And so that measurement for me makes for comfort for a client. Is it necessarily breakthrough? I don't think so. Is it necessarily going to, is it revolutionary? I don't think so. If anything, I think around the measurements and how we see what's relevant to clients, click-throughs, mentions, I'm just seeing greater appetite for evolution and not revolution. I compare this report with last year's, and that's exactly what I'm seeing. I also like how you indicated that it's forward thinking. So I see this as a hold-handing process. A hand-holding process, as opposed to this revolution. So I actually can understand why TikTok is performing as it is, as opposed to LinkedIn and Facebook.
Arthur, on yours, before I go, I'm just going to go a little bit back. In your article, you've said there's a drop specifically because of that algorithm feeding a lot of that fake news behind it, and people getting really, really frustrated. Can you just elaborate on that point?
Yes, last year saw you could almost say a watershed moment in Facebook's credibility. Well, what then became Meta, the credibility of Meta overall, and the extent to which advertisers at one stage boycotted Meta for its failure to deal with the issues that were being thrown at it. And essentially, the reputational damage was massive in terms of brands using it. Briefly, it had an impact on the advertising revenue as well. But brands tend to forget very fast when they're allocating budget and looking at where they're going to get the most bang for their buck. Clearly, that'll still be Facebook at this stage. So they forgive and forget very quickly. But the market in general is not going to forget very fast. So trust in Facebook generally has diminished. And I think that's a key factor in fewer brands using it. Other brands will leap in and fill the gap in terms of Facebook's ad spend. There's no question about that. But it did force them to look elsewhere to see where they could be more effective. I should just also mention there's a sense that that TikTok is small relative to, for example, LinkedIn. But one has to look at the trajectory. No platform or technology will enjoy overnight adoption by the market as a whole. You'll always see a rise in its use. I'll never forget when ADSL arrived. I'm not giving away too much about my age to say it was 2003 when we started measuring the uptake of ADSL. And from 2003 to 2009, there was a straight line from near zero to near pervasive use by small businesses, whereas dial-up went in exactly the opposite direction. But if you took a snapshot at any point along that route, you would have said, why are so few people taking up ADSL? But the trajectory was what mattered, and the end point of that trajectory was pervasiveness. So I'm not saying TikTok will be pervasive, but you've got to look at that trajectory of TikTok rising dramatically and Facebook falling back somewhat.
If I could just comment.
Go for it, Chumi.
So I also think it's a matter of perspective, right? The perspective from which you see the growth of a particular platform and which audience it serves. So the power of TikTok is actually its ability to hand over narrative and to hand over the power of publisher to the consumer. It lends itself so well, finally, and I think it's great that that age has arrived, to user-generated content. So brands that are inclined and that have that understanding of that platform and that have a need for that kind of engagement, I think, would naturally gravitate there. But many more brands, are still in the space where they want to tread carefully. So it's a very fine balance, I think, when you look at the explosion of TikTok once again. And I think it's a matter of perspective. I think it's performing really well, actually.
Before we go in, and I want to dig a little bit deeper into this TikTok issue, specifically after the American ruling of getting TikTok off the app stores. I want to get a little bit deeper. But before we do that, MJ, from your perspective, if you can just weigh in on LinkedIn, you manage the largest corporate LinkedIn page in Africa. So do you want to just give us a little bit of insight in that?
Yeah, thanks so much. LinkedIn, I've been a huge advocate of the platform for years. I think it's fantastic, and for a few reasons. I think in terms of LinkedIn, you're looking at, and the data that Arthur shared as well reflects this, a portion of a very active, sort of economically empowered consumer set in South Africa, which is really valuable for marketers, right? You want to go to a space where you have people who could buy your goods. And I'm not saying that the formal economy is the most important, but it's definitely ways up there. But what I found with LinkedIn usage as well is, the number one, there's a sense of discretion that a lot of people would have with their LinkedIn profile versus, for example, a Twitter profile, right? Which means it lends itself to less toxicity. So the people would like to spend more time on that platform simply because it's not as toxic as other platforms. So that's number one. Number two, I think brands are also starting to treat LinkedIn a lot more differently. It's less just about the pure marketing spiel and the really hardcore sort of sales pitch. It's more around things like employee advocacy, like something I believe very strongly in, and perhaps one of the reasons why we've been able to grow our page so rapidly and so fast is we completely democratize the platform. It's not just about celebrating leadership, it's about celebrating everyone. It's about changing the narrative of the company. So we don't put ourselves out there as this perfect brand. We put ourselves out there as a brand that's committed to being better tomorrow than we were today, to strive more. And that really resonates. We also don't hold ourselves to these arbitrary production value standards. So I know previously, if there was a picture that someone would send through for us for LinkedIn and it wasn't shot in like a professional camera or anything like that, we would think, should we use it? Should we not? And now we're like, heck, let's tell our stories. Let's celebrate our people. Let's not just maintain some production standard just for the sake of it and spite ourselves by not celebrating everyone. So we've had this dramatic shift on our platform over the last 4 or 5 years. and it's really it bear a lot of fruit. So I think LinkedIn is a great platform. I think when you think about LinkedIn, don't just think of it from sort of a more archaic B2B type of perspective. It really is valuable, and then just use it to celebrate your people.
If I could add to what MJ has said, I mean, I know at Joe Public we have something called First Thursdays, where the first Thursday of each month, we literally look at trends and insights and updates on each platform. And LinkedIn has done a lot of internal work. If we look at it, I think I saw a post yesterday where somebody's like, finally, there's a button for an enjoyment button on LinkedIn. You know, there's these little there's these little things that each platform is doing to develop itself that makes it more appealing. When we look at Instagram, when we look at Reels, you see that kind of change, as opposed to the whole IGTV thing, which wasn't working. That long format of 1 minute wasn't working. Now they have these short reel pieces of content. So back to LinkedIn. LinkedIn actually now has worked on, because we can't downplay influencer marketing and the impact that people have on platforms. So now LinkedIn has things where you can actually get monetized and incentivized to actually be an influencer on LinkedIn. So I think that a lot of work that brands are doing within themselves also is helping the way people can use them and utilize them.
Cool. And yeah, we've also found the same thing from an Ornico perspective. Our LinkedIn has grown dramatically. I think, Calvin, I haven't forgotten you, definitely. And this is the area I want to try and get back into the metaverse conversation. Is GWR conducted a Zeitgeist survey. And in that, they said the knowledge of the metaverse is split almost equally between three groups: 33% to understand the concept, 37% to have heard of it but aren't sure what it means, and 30% who are not sure at all. So give us your view of the metaverse.
Sure. I think the real stat is 100% of people think they know something but don't actually know what it is. So I mean, it's just interesting what we're talking about in terms of movement to what looks like niche communities. So LinkedIn would be a niche community because it's focused on a very specific need that people have, as opposed to this mass market platform like Facebook and what Twitter was, I suppose. But we're also seeing a lot of businesses moving to the point of building their own communities as a way to, I guess, build up their first party data, their engagements with future engagements with customers if they can't advertise to them in the future. And that also speaks to this need for control. You can't build your entire strategy on somebody else's platform when they're going to change the rules, like Arthur spoke about, these algorithms that keep changing, and you don't really know what's underlying it. So take all of that and combine the fact that the disruptors and the smaller companies, because I don't think it's the metas that are going to be owning the metaverse, and that it is going to be the guys that are building something unique and new in this, what we call a metaverse, that are going to own things. And that's driven by building a decentralized area for people to play and live and have their own economies, and economies that don't rely on banks and tokens built by big tech. So I think there's a very strong correlation between where brands and marketers are looking already and where consumers are, I guess, leading, where developers are leading the way.
So a lot of the times the metaverse and Web3 are changed in the media, which is completely wrong. Web3 is where content, or anything, ultimately where this distributed ledger, and people have a much more control over their content. How will that work for brands, Calvin, from that perspective? So now influencers or content providers can monetize through tokens, can monetize their content a hell of a lot easier, I believe, on the Web3 space. How will that work for brands? How will they trust their content, because a lot of the brands want to own and hold on to their own content at the end of the day. But this will be much more distributed within Web3. How do you see them handling it from that perspective?
I mean, I can't imagine where it would go to, but it reminds me of when social media came around and everyone was so terrified of having a Facebook page because they were just terrified that all these negative comments would flow in and they wouldn't know what to do with it. And they thought that providing this space and interacting in this space would just invite negativity. So I think the fear of the unknown is not a good enough reason for brands not to accept where it's going and to keep a handle on it. I think the reality as well is we don't know what it's going to end up. We have no idea where this is going to go, and just being part of it in small, I guess, focused ways is the only way to start experimenting. The interesting thing that I heard and that I'm aware of is Web 1 and probably Web 2 was built by web developers, and the metaverse, or Web 3, let's call it the metaverse, is going to be built by gaming developers. And just thinking about that difference also changes how those content creators who those content creators are going to be. The days of video influencers are probably numbered.
MJ, your take on the Web3 versus metaverse, and how brand, specifically because it's a social media landscape report, specifically how are brands going to utilize it? Will there be a lot more social interaction? How will that kind of work?
Thanks for the question. I think when we get enamored by tech and we get enamored by sort of half-assed it is, but sometimes we also need to consider our own cultural latency, and that's our ability to change and to consume the tech and to see value in it. And that means fundamentally, as human beings, as much as you can throw tech, as much you can throw whatever it is, AR, VR, etc. It comes down to, does this offer convenience? Does this offer value? Strip away all the tech, you strip away everything else, and from a consumer level, does this offer me some level of convenience? Does this offer me value? And often as brands are sometimes guilty of looking at the gimmick, looking at the shiny, but not bringing you back to, are we solving a consumer challenge or problem? Are we pushing a marketing or business objective? And I think if brands come back to those questions and say, what are we doing in terms of, like, is this piece of tech actually helping our customers, or is it just there because we think it should be there? And we see this happen over and over again, right? So we'll have conversations around apps. And I know apps is sometimes a pejorative term, and people are like, oh, everyone wants to build an app, but why build an app? And we don't like apps. The truth is, you don't like useless apps. You don't like pointless apps. So many of us in this forum love the Escom to push app, right? Because it tells us about load shedding, gives us notification, and that's an app. But somehow that has been stripped away of the negativity that other apps have, because for the other apps, you don't see the value in it. And I think similarly, these are the conversations that are going to keep propping up, regardless of the tech, whether the tech is virtual reality, is augmented reality, regardless of what it is, unless brands can sincerely show that this piece of tech is going to give the consumers more convenience, more value, we're going to keep having these same conversations every time something new and shiny comes about.
Yep. And a lot of us do want to just jump onto that shiny little bit every so often. There's a real question when you're talking about what brands concern themselves with. And of course, they concern themselves about the consumer and what the consumers are all about. In the metaverse, how do you determine who that consumer is? Is he a 62-year-old Oresti in the real world, or is he an 18-year-old Oresti in the metaverse? And so how do you market, and who do you market to that? To me, your views on that perspective. I know a difficult question because we don't know anymore.
So, I was making a note here as I'm listening to the guys speak, and I go back to the power of curatorship and handing it over to someone, whether you hand it over to your consumers or you hand it over to your brand. And I think, to reference an old world example, actually, for me, the metaverse seems like a channel where consumers get to personify, bring to life their ideal selves, their best selves. So going back to the lessons around TikTok, for example, as a platform, and where the user uses their power to create an experience, to curate their own narrative, I think the metaverse is going to allow for that as well, most definitely. And so, what might matter more is not so much who this audience demographically is, but rather what their interest sets are. Wouldn't reference, for example, exploring tags, and kind of looking at interest sets from a consumer point of view. And I think actually that is going to be a more unifying way of evaluating how the metaverse can serve brands, rather than looking at demographics and kind of, that binary view. I just think that interest sets are going to grow in more value and as an indicator of who your consumer is, rather than, just age and kind of stats and those demographics. And by the way, that said, I also don't think it's either or. I think it's a combination of those measures. So it's kind of like the demographics are important, but the interest sets are also just as important.
But thanks to me, Bluntly, from your perspective, exactly the target market that metaverse would identify with. So yeah, your perspective?
So, you know what, I think the interesting thing with me is that what I found out is that when I thought metaverse, I thought Facebook, and that wasn't the case. Metaverse are digital worlds. So Santam can create their own metaverse. I mean, anybody can create their own metaverse, because metaverse is not owned by anybody, it's owned by everyone. With that being said, like there's one called Decentraland. You know what I mean? I mean, Kevin was talking about the whole decentralized thing. It's literally a society within itself. It's got its own money. It's got its own government system. It's got everything to do. So when we say like, who are we targeting or who it is, that's a very, very hard question to answer, right? Because this is a space of limitless users, limitless possibilities. You can literally go anywhere. You can go over there, you can jump from one place to another place. So I think that the metaverse in itself belongs to everybody. But the great thing about it is that there's this distinct relationship between this virtual world and this physical world. And I think that's what brands should focus on. If you're strolling, like the same way people, I know like older people will think about it in a very like, oh, this seems like a waste of time. Or why would people even bother being into this virtual world? But the same way people go to the shops for leisure, or to movies, or to go and meet up with their friends, they're doing these same things in those kinds of spaces. So I think what brands need to focus on maybe is not as Dumi was saying, not basically their target market per se, but cementing themselves in those spaces and what people can gain from being in those kinds of spaces. So to say that, if I'm in the metaverse, I need to be looking at X, Y, and Z, I don't know if I could even speak to that. But what I definitely know is that it's a very immersive experience. It's like walking past the Wimpy and you can see there's a Wimpy at metaverse. You have that experience of sitting in a Wimpy. In the physical world, if you can probably experience the same thing. And it's kind of that feeling that you want to hone into, not necessarily targeting that person directly. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the way I picture it, and that's the way I think that brands should be looking at that space.
Thanks, Boncle. Calvin, you want to weigh in on this conversation before I move back to
just a quick one. I think trying to think of individuals that will be living or are living in what will be the metaverse as the people who are sitting behind their screens or behind their visors or on their phones is potentially the wrong way to do it. And I realized this with my kids. They have dual identities, as a lot of us do without even thinking about it. And when you're in that space, you would be speaking to and engaging with the other identity and their needs. And these people are creating, that's why they're buying digital assets, because that identity is as important as my physical identity. And so taking that into consideration, as opposed to trying to translate who is this person, what LSM are they sitting somewhere else, is maybe beyond the point. And I think there's not even going to be an email address that you can send them an email to. So I think that's something to pay attention to.
Yeah, Calvin, I also think you started with sorry, I keep jumping in, but Calvin made a very, very important point around around where metaverse and its creation is coming from a gaming point of view. That in its nature is designed for immersion, right? It's a very immersive experience, and the whole point is to give the power of, or rather to give a deeper experience of that dual identity. And we kind of see this in so many other dimensions. I mean, that's what social media enabled initially, hence the social aspect of it. But more and more, we're getting serious about being a second person, having a second identity and living in a second world. It allows for that kind of travel. And why not make it as immersive as possible, you know?
Sorry, I'm also just gonna jump in. I just want to elaborate. I'm getting really excited by this conversation about like dual personalities. When you look at digital fashion, I mean, there's a lot of luxury brands that have jumped onto the metaverse, and they're actually doing really well. I mean, you're getting millions of people who are streaming into a digital fashion show, and that physically that would not have been possible to have physically millions of people there at a fashion show. But then you have this space where people are there experiencing this. And that whole thing is that there's a certain way that you want to portray yourself there. I mean, Fortnite has got skins, you know what I mean? So this concept of like digital fashion and like accessories and all those kinds of things, it's not a new thing. I mean, gaming has been doing it. You buy a mask, you buy an outfit or whatever that case is. So I think that's where, when you're talking about the e-commerce, when we're talking about like monetization and NFTs, that kind of space, I think the metaverse does it really well, because you want to coexist, you want to live in this world the same way you would live in this world physically. That even comes with digital plots of land. I know there's people who are buying literal like homes on the metaverse. There are brands that are building stores in the metaverse. So it's kind of like you want to not reciprocate, but you want to live the life you want to in that space and kind of like live out that life. And I think that's what makes it a little bit appealing, is that you can take on this dual personality and become this other kind of person in another space.
Cool.
I'm going to jump in there as well. Go ahead, Oresti.
Yeah, I just want to go back to, this is where the conversation really starts getting exciting, and we're just about coming to an end of it. I want to get back to the hard numbers with Arthur here. Arthur, we were just talking again about TikTok and the rise of TikTok. And I want to go back to that original question that I had, in that the US is now looking at banning TikTok off these apps. And the reason why they feel is that they're stating that it's not really what it is. It's a kind of surveillance tool for the Chinese. How will that affect if the US goes ahead with this? I'm sure that this will really affect TikTok dramatically. What do you think? How do you think it's going to play out going forward? I think it's important.
That would be a huge blow to TikTok. It would definitely arrest its growth, and that trajectory would instantly hit a plateau, because the Apple App Store and Android Play Store are the key factors in the growth of TikTok, in particular on Android. And the US government has the power to block both of those from allowing it to be downloaded. Side loading is not going to do it for TikTok, because it depends so heavily on a mass audience. Unless they can convince the US government elsewhere or get a stay of execution, so to speak, the only solution for them would be to instantly immigrate TikTok from China to a less, or let's say a more benign environment where there is not going to be surveillance. It's been shown that TikTok users are being monitored. So it is a major issue for TikTok. The solution that Telegram embraced is probably the one they have to go for. Telegram, when the Russian government tried to force them to provide a backdoor into their system, they relocated to Germany, and that not just rescued them from the clutches of the Russian government, but also reaffirmed the credibility of the platform. And TikTok needs a Telegram moment.
I think that's a really great soundbite. TikTok needs a Telegram moment. For me, the other insight, and I think it's perhaps the next piece of work to be done, is around how the regulatory environment around social media is catching up with social media. It would be very interesting to see how businesses have to evolve, or rather are forcing the regulatory environment to evolve, exactly around the point that, example that Arthur made. I just think that that's a really great soundbite.
Yeah. I'm just going to get one question, because we've kind of run out of time, from Nazarene Ibrahim to MJ and to Bonkle. And the question is, would you say that TikTok usage has a young enough audience for potential college university students in township ecosystem to actively invest in reaching these young people on this particular platform? So MJ, do you want to start, and then we'll end up with Bonkle?
Sure. So I know we're running out of time, so 2 quick thoughts. Number one, look at the platforms that reward light data usage. So TikTok's one of those platforms. As much as it's quite intensive because it's video, there is a light version. Then we are seeing that penetration. Number two, I think what's really important, and I've seen this last week, I was judging the bookmarks, specifically the social media panel, is we need to start considering how the users are using TikTok, what they're using it for, and how disruptive brands can become on those platforms. So often a brand will think they need to make it big on TikTok by making a dance. And simply because that's what the users are doing. And then you see this complete disconnect between a brand and a user. But to come back to that point here, I think it's really pervasive in South Africa. I guess a lot of shareability. And in fact, there's an upcoming township marketing conference that's going to unpack that a little bit more. I think TikTok's a powerful space, but brands can't just wade into it the way they have with other platforms. It needs to be a lot more considered.
Yeah, I agree with what MJ said. I mean, I think that there's something that's very mass appealing about TikTok. I think that also, like, the way in which, I mean, you look at, the hashtag South African TikTok, and you look at the kind of content that's coming out from that. Very relatable content, something that you can actually look at as a South African and laugh, because you understand exactly what's happening, exactly what's going on. So I definitely think that as brands, I think the biggest, and I love TikTok's tagline, make TikToks, not ads. And I go back to that it's about making content that's authentic. People are tired of the whole polished addy that you see on Instagram and that you see on, like, television. They want real content that they can relate to. So I definitely think that there's a way that brands should go about making TikToks more relevant and relatable to the audience. And it's just about just generally listening to what's going on, what's happening. Social listening is a great tool. Trends come in and out, but staying authentic to the brand and staying authentic to the platform, I think, is the way to go.
Great, guys. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and now the questions are starting to roll in from our audiences. So unfortunately, we can't, but we will address these directly in the next couple of days. Guys, MJ, Bonkle, Tumi, Calvin, really thank you very much for your time and effort being on this panel. To TGI, Turn Left Media, Ad Dynamo, thanks a lot. And obviously, Arthur, you and I have been doing this forever. So thank you very much. Thanks for your insights. It's absolutely incredible. As you guys know, you can download this from Worldwide Worx or Ornico website. It's going to be up there in the next 5-10 minutes. So guys, thank you very much. It's really interesting. We could carry on for another hour. And thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone. This has really been great.